Today we are talking organization and specifically color organization in quilt patterns. This is something a little bit less tangible, so bear with me. I'm going to try and explain it the best that I can. But this is typically something that comes with experience, kind of an intangible thing that you see in the more experienced designers' patterns that is kind of lacking in the first couple of patterns that they write, because it's just kind of this, you can't quite place your finger on it, but it separates a pattern from being just kind of okay to really, really good. So color organization is basically how you rationalize the fabrics and colors in your quilt. There needs to be some sort of method to the madness so that your customer can wrap their head around how to choose fabrics, plan their quilt, and kind of make those decisions so they end up with something that they love. Because putting two colors that don't look good together right next to each other, or just including colors that don't work together, is something that can make or break a quilt. You can pick 7 colors that all look great when you're sitting there kind of just looking at them in bolts of fabric, but when you put them into a design, into a pattern, sometimes they just don't work. And so color organization is like, how do you write the pattern in such a way that it's easy for your customer to kind of understand what's going on with the colors so that they can make the right decisions about the fabrics and things that they're using? Because newsflash, most of the time when a customer buys a pattern, they are not going to use the exact same fabrics you did. Occasionally that happens, right? You'll sell a quilt kit with your pattern and the cover quilt really does sell the pattern, right? But once that first initial wave's over, most of the people that are going to buy your pattern after that are not going to be using those same fabrics, either because they're not available or just because a lot of us as quilters go, I love that design, but I want to do it in these colors, which are my favorite. I don't like those colorways. And so if they're not using your same colors, you need to be able to communicate the rationale behind how you are choosing colors and organizing these colors so that it makes sense and so they can kind of come to terms with what colors are going where and make the right decisions about what fabrics they want to use. So we're going to go through kind of 3 ways that you can organize colors and fabrics in quilt patterns, but the important thing here is just to make sure that you have some method to the madness. Too often I've gotten patterns from clients that just kind of, you can tell they developed organically, right? Like they were messing with the mock-up, they fell in love with this design, and now they're just kind of cherry picking where they want to put colors based on the palette that they've chosen to use for their quilt. And that's great. It's going to make a beautiful quilt, but it doesn't translate well for somebody trying to change to a different palette. And so the really important thing here is just to make sure that you have some sort of organization and that you're not just like randomly deciding where the colors go. That's what we want to avoid. Make sure that there is some method to the madness that you can communicate to someone who's trying to make it in a different palette. So the first option for color organization is just a simple ombre, which is what you see here. This is my pattern, Romeo Twins, and it's just a gradient, right? Go from light to dark. Maybe that's within a color, maybe it's across a spectrum of colors like you're seeing here, but it doesn't have to be this simple. You can still have ombre color organization that is not just a gradient from top to bottom. You could have it going, inside to outside within a block, or even something a little bit more complicated from that, but it's still based on this ombre, right? And so somewhere in the before you begin section or in your pattern notes with the fabric requirements, something along those lines, you want to put a note in that this was designed to be an ombre. You're going to pick 6 fabrics, A through F. A is going to be the lightest, F's going to be the darkest, right? Sort your fabrics accordingly in order to get all of the fabrics showing up in the right spots to kind of give that overall effect to the design that was intended with the pattern that you designed. The next option for color organization is what I call swapping. So this is Mosaic Star. It's a quilt pattern by, lo and behold, Stitchery. Gorgeous. This was actually designed as a fat quarter friendly pattern. So you've got 16 fabrics here, 16 blocks, and basically every unique fabric is going to show up in one location within the block. So if you kind of track this fuchsia pink color, right, it's in the star points in this block, it's in the triangles in this block, it's in the alternate triangles here. And if you kind of go through each of these things, you're going to see that it kind of swaps until it's occupied every position within the block. This looks random. It looks scrappy, but it's not. And that's really important, again, because you want to have some sort of method here. A lot of people get intimidated by having to just kind of randomly distribute things. And yes, that's true scrappy. That's why a lot of people find scrappy quilts so hard. But as a designer, kind of taking that decision-making part of the process away from them actually helps them so much because it becomes overwhelming. It becomes a source of anxiety if they've got to make all of these kind of randomization decisions for themselves because they're like, What if I end up with colors clumped? Like, what if I'm not paying attention? It doesn't look random enough. Like, all of these things come up. And so this kind of swapping organization can be really helpful. Now, it doesn't have to be one position uniquely. You could have, you know, duplicate blocks, 2 of each block if you wanted to, but making sure as you kind of mock up the pattern that there is some rationale to it. And it's not just like, well, this fabric is used for star points and triangle points in 2 out of 5 blocks, but this other fabric is used for triangle points and star points, and also the corner pieces in 5 out of 7 blocks, but only 2 of these, rationale, right? Organization in some way, but having this kind of swapping organization where each fabric is occupying one of the feature fabric positions in each of the blocks, and then that repeats some certain number of times so it's consistent between fabrics is one really good way to do it, especially if you're doing something like fat quarter patterns. The last kind of example that I have for you is this, and I don't really have a name for it. There's not really a succinct way to describe it, but basically what you're seeing here are multiple blocks that are being used together to build up this kind of pattern. And so it's not as simple as just, you know, one fabric per block. You kind of have to have it spill over across multiple blocks. This is Modern Love by So Much More. Gorgeous pattern, really, really cool for Valentine's Day. But basically when you're building this up, because it's, you know, 2 different blocks and you're mixing fabrics between blocks in order to get this kind of net secondary design that comes out only when you put the blocks together, you have to have some sort of organization when you're building up this pattern so people get their fabrics in the right spots and you don't end up with like points that are the wrong fabric. And so you don't get these like cute little blocks, right? So the best way that I have found to kind of communicate this in a pattern is to have the customer kind of go through some sort of numbering sequence at the beginning. And then that kind of becomes their universal key as they're working on the quilt, and they just kind of follow it through and everything makes sense. And so in that particular instance, you would basically number each one of these things, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And in this particular pattern, it looks like some of these fabrics are repeating more than once. And so what you see here is like, this is number 3, this is number 2, and here we've got it repeating down here. So right, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it just kind of repeats from there. Again, you might think like, well, most quilters aren't even gonna follow us. They're just gonna kind of do their own thing. And yeah, you will definitely have some customers that can do that, but communicating what the original scheme was helps them understand how to do that so that they can make their own choices and it ends up working for them. But you're also going to have a large population of customers that don't like having to make those decisions. They just want to follow it word for word and get a quilt pattern at the end where it doesn't require a lot of kind of mental calories from them. They're quilting to escape, not to, you know, have a big cognitive function. So taking those decisions away from them and just making it really easy to just kind of follow along and not have to think too hard about whether or not their fabrics are random enough simplifies that process so much more. And again, it's not really important about how you organize it. It's more so important about that you organize it. Don't just leave it up to chance. Don't just say, hey, distribute it randomly because people are going to sit there and hyperventilate. It drives quilters nuts. Trust me, I've seen it a lot. This will also keep kind of your fabric requirements a little bit more consistent, especially for these scrappy quilts that have a bunch of different colors in them. You don't want to have like 2 yards of one fabric and 1/8 of a yard of another fabric and then 3/4 of a yard for another fabric, right? And bouncing around. It makes it really hard to shop for fabrics that way. So if you're using a ton of fabrics, you kind of want to keep all of their yardages even. And so having some sort of scheme makes that easier. Like a fat quarter pattern, right? That's exactly what we're talking about here. Even if it's not fat quarter cuts that you're working with, just make sure there's some organization and it's not just you cherry picking where fabrics go based on the specific color palette that you've chosen for this particular cover quilt that you're making. It might look great with your palette. It's going to make it really difficult to translate to another palette or just for your customer to kind of customize and design the quilt that they want, which is what it's all about. This is about your customer. It's not about you. Alrighty, that's all I've got for today. If you found this video helpful, make sure you like and subscribe and let me know in the comments what else you'd like to see. I would love to hear what kinds of pattern writing struggles you're dealing with so we can talk about it because I have seen it all. All right, join me next week for Tech Tip Tuesday and I will see you then. See ya.